As noted, the topic is the right not to be manipulated. I'm going to urge that we ought to recognize such a moral right running against both private actors and also the government. I will urge that lies, coercion, and manipulation have a great deal in common. At the same time, I'm going to suggest that the idea of a legal right not to be manipulated, to be recognized and enforced by the authorities, runs into serious challenges, in part because of the definitional problem and in part because of the risk of overreaching. The best approach, I'll suggest, would be to regulate specific practices that count as manipulative, not to ban manipulation in general. I will urge that in the worst cases, both for moral and legal purposes, manipulation is a form of theft, and the law should forbid theft however it occurs. In defending these points, I'm going to address 5 separate questions. Forgive the large number. The first is, what is manipulation? The second is, what is wrong with it? The third is, when might manipulation be justified? The fourth is, should there be a moral right not to be manipulated? And the fifth involves the question, should there be a legal right? And if there should, what ought it to include? Okay, in philosophical circles and to some extent in economics and psychology, there's a great deal of work on the definitional question, and notwithstanding the differences, which I'm going to trace a little bit, the commonalities are noteworthy. Avishai Margalit urges that manipulation subverts the capacity to ask for a reason, which means that it undermines a condition for autonomy, which involves the right cognitive capacity for choosing. In his view, manipulation hinges on seduction, and so is unlike coercion, which hinges on intimidation. And I want to pause over that. I think it's right to say that manipulation has something in common with seduction, and to link while separating manipulation from coercion, which is about intimidation. On Wilkinson's account, manipulation is a kind of influences that bypasses or subverts the target's rational capacities. So that has something in common with the definition you just heard. If we are thinking of manipulation as something that subverts and insults the person's autonomous decision-making, it treats its objects as, in Wilkinson's words, tools and fools. For Wilkinson, manipulation is intentionally and successfully influencing someone using methods that perverse choice. In a related account, Joseph Raz urges that manipulation, unlike coercion, does not interfere with the person's options. Instead, it perverts the way the person reaches decisions, forms preferences, or adopts goals. Okay, the idea of perverting choice or of subverting people's way of reaching decisions or forming preferences is not self-defining. I urge that it should be understood to refer to methods that do not appeal to or produce the right degree or kind of reflective deliberation. To this extent, a defining characteristic of manipulation is that it infringes upon the autonomy of the victim by subverting and insulting their decision-making powers. In some circumstances, not all, seduction has exactly that consequence. My preferred definition of manipulation urges that a statement or action counts as manipulative when it does not sufficiently engage or appeal to people's capacity for reflective and deliberative choice. Marketing strategies that appeal to people's deepest hopes or fears, and maybe you're thinking of examples, might be counted as manipulative. So are efforts to trigger identifiable biases, such as present bias, availability, or optimistic bias. Those can be counted as manipulative. Subliminal advertising can be seen as an unambiguous and iconic example of manipulation, insofar as subliminal advertising really bypasses people's capacity for reflective and deliberative choice. And I'm committing the sin of using really in italics as a substitute for an argument, but you get the point. It's important to see that manipulation is different from deception. Manipulators trick you, deceivers lie to you. Your mother or your lover might manipulate you without deceiving you. And the same is true of a marketing campaign for aspirin or for cold medicines, or for a policymaker imposing some kind of requirement or a head of state. They might manipulate you without lying to you. Are nudges manipulative? This question may be of particular interest to yours truly, but I hope it's of general interest in view of the widespread use of nudging by private and public institutions. Are nudges as such a form of theft? It would be hard to defend that conclusion. Certainly the kinds of nudges that have attracted official support in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in Germany, in Australia, in the United States, in India, and elsewhere, fit rarely, if ever, with any reasonable definition of manipulation. Information disclosure, reminders, and warnings are canonical nudges, and they are hardly manipulative. Consider calorie labels, energy efficiency labels, or warnings about allergens in foods. These are educative nudges, and unless we add some complications, a claim that they are manipulative would be preposterous. Simplification of communications so that people can more easily understand what is being said, to make it easier for them to get a visa or citizenship, for example, is at the opposite pole from manipulation. Many nudges promote navigability. That is a singularly important goal of nudging, and they are not manipulating anyone. Things get a bit more complicated with respect to manipulation once we emphasize that some nudges are not educative, but are instead architectural. So if you list certain items first, or if you automatically enroll people in certain programs, education is incidental, and education is not the primary driver of influence. Default rules often stick in part because of the force of inertia. Suppose that a public official or a company is aware of that and decides to exploit the stickiness of defaults. Seeking to save money, she might decide in favor of a double-sided default for printing. Seeking to reduce pollution, she might promote or even require a default rule in favor of green energy, as has been used, by the way, to very significant effect in both Germany and Switzerland. California isn't a country, but in California, the same thing has happened. Seeking to increase savings, a policymaker or a company might promote automatic enrollment in retirement plans. Are these initiatives manipulative? Insofar as default rules carry an element of suggestion, a kind of informational signal, they really aren't. They're appealing to deliberative capacities to the extent that they convey information about what planners think people ought to be doing. The analysis is less straightforward insofar as default rules stick because of inertia. If people are, without making a conscious choice, enrolled in some kind of program or plan, it might be charged that the official is exploiting people's tendency to inertia and procrastination. The question then is whether automatic enrollment fails sufficiently to engage reflection and deliberation under my preferred definition. To answer that question, transparency really matters. Do people know that they can opt out? Is it clear to them that they've been automatically enrolled? Is it easy for them to opt out? It is surely relevant that an opt-in default is likely to stick as well, which means that the question is whether any default rule counts as a form of manipulation. The answer to that question is plain. Life cannot be navigated without default rules. Try it if you have a laptop or a cell phone or a relationship with your employer. And so long as the relevant agent, the choice actor, is not hiding or suppressing anything, The choice of one or another default ought not to be characterized as manipulative. Note that people do reject default rules that they dislike. That happens so long as it's made clear that opt-out is available and so long as opt-out is easy. Okay, we might notice here that the corollary is that if opt-out is not transparent and if it's hard, we might have a case of manipulation, and that's a big problem. I'll get to that. Okay, when is manipulation wrong and what's wrong with it? To answer that question, now that we have a kind of working definition in the background, we need to talk about philosophical foundations. And let's use, shall we, in honor of my birthday, Kant and Bentham, two of my heroes. On Kantian grounds, manipulation is wrong is that it is disrespectful of choosers. It does not respect their agency. It offends their autonomy and their dignity. People should be treated as adults, as ends, not as children or as means. And if private or public institutions fail sufficiently to engage people's capacity for reflective choice, they are treating them without respect. Compare the case of lying. I want to urge manipulation and lying are sibling concepts. Kant urged, by a lie, a man throws away and, as it were, annihilates his dignity as a man. Contemporary Kantians believe that the problem with lies is that they deny agency to those who are subject to them. As Korsgaard puts it, lying is wrong because it violates the autonomy of the person to whom you lie. Lying can be seen as a form of manipulation, and for Kantians, it is a close cousin to coercion. Like coercion, it strips agency from its objects and subjects them to the will of others. So the Kantian view is that there's a box, an evil box with coercion, manipulation, and lying in it. And at the level of philosophical fundamentals, they suffer from the same wrong. That is a denial of agency. So if someone manipulates you into buying something or choosing something or even taking a medicine or eating healthy, you are not being treated with respect, and it's as if you've been forced. From the Benthamite point of view, the objection is very different. A pervasive concern from the welfarist perspective is manipulators might be promoting their own interests rather than those of the chooser. Why, the Benthamite asks, is it necessary to resort to manipulation rather than to provide information and to engage the chooser's reflective capacities? On the welfarist view, the problem with manipulators is that they probably lack relevant information about the chooser's situations, tastes, and values. Lacking that knowledge, they nonetheless subvert the process by which choosers select what is best for them. Paternalistic manipulators are assuming they know best, and that's often false. Self-interested manipulators are thieves of money, emotions, time, and attention, or something else, and paternalistic manipulators are similar, even if their motives are benign. Now, if these points about the Benthamite objection to manipulation seem familiar, good, because they are growing out of the most famous work by Bentham's student, Mill, and urging that the utilitarian objection to manipulation is rooted in the same concerns that underlie Mill's harm principle. Mill offered a number of arguments on behalf of the harm principle, but bear with me now. We're going to get manipulation in a moment, I completely promise. Mill's most important claim about coercion is epistemic. He insists that the individual is the person most interested in his own well-being, and that the ordinary man or woman has means of knowledge immeasurably surpassing those that can be possessed by anyone else. So, Mill urges, when society seeks to overrule the individual's judgment, it does so on the basis of general presumptions and these may be altogether wrong, and even if right, are as likely as not to be misapplied to individual cases. So Mill urges on utilitarian grounds that if our goal is to ensure that people's lives go well, the best solution is to allow people to find their own path. That is to say, Mill's epistemic justification for the harm principle is that choosers are better situated than outsiders to know what's best for the individual, because choosers know most about their own lives. This is not a Kantian claim about people having a right to be authors of their own narrative. It's a welfarist claim about what's likely to make people's lives go well. Mill's points apply to manipulators no less to those who engage in coercion. The claim is that if you think that people are about to make a mistake, you should explain to them why you think so. You should tell them why they're wrong. You should inform them, not manipulate them. On utilitarian grounds, the risk is that if you manipulate them to get them to do what you think is in their interest, there's a grave risk that you'll miss something of crucial importance, just like someone who's coercing someone. The obligation of the outsider is to put people in the position to make good choices by their own lights, not to manipulate them. And you may be aware that Ralph Hertwig, the German psychologist, and others have been working on something they call boosting as an alternative to nudging. Whether or not we like boosting better than nudging, it has arguable Kantian and Millian foundations. Okay, we ought to emphasize that the force of the welfarist objection to manipulation is contingent. It depends on the context and the circumstances. Bentham emphasized with respect to lying the need to focus on consequences. Please don't be shocked, but here are Bentham's own words. Falsehood taken by itself, consider it as not being accompanied by any other material circumstances, can never, upon the principle of utility, constitute any offense at all. Hence Bentham's license, I guess, to speak falsely, if that promotes utility. And Henry Sidgwick was very explicit and said exactly the same thing. Like liars, manipulators might make people better off. They might save lives. They need not be thieves. On welfarist assumptions, they might be saints. Welfarists would insist on distinguishing between beneficial and harmful manipulation. It is fine to manipulate terrorists and kidnappers. In ordinary life, welfarists are not likely to object much if friends or families manipulate people in order to make their lives go better, or to prevent grievous harm, or even to have a little fun. Okay, now let's turn to the question of law. We now have a sense of what manipulation might be. We have a sense of why on Kantian and Benthamite grounds, manipulation is at least presumptively a moral wrong. Now let's turn to law. Many social norms are directed against conduct, unkindness, incivility, inconsiderateness, even cruelty, that is not and cannot be defined with sufficient precision for law. Unkindness is wrong. Cruelty too, with certain exceptions, neither has a place in law. Cruelty is a little complicated. One reason for the existence of norms that the legal system refuses to work with is vagueness. The problem of vagueness raises really serious concerns. First, people will not have fair notice about what they can and cannot do. And second, enforcement authorities will have undue discretion to pick and choose. So the problem of lack of fair notice, with roots in the idea of the rule of law, is that people can't plan their affairs. The problem of undue discretion points both toward arbitrariness in the sense of a lottery with law enforcement, and to the invidious exercise of discretion in which the enforcement authorities go after people they don't like. In ordinary language, and even as elaborated by the most careful philosophical accounts, manipulation is hard to make sufficiently precise as to be the basis for regulation or criminal law. The second problem is overbreadth. Many categories of bad conduct, including incivility and inconsiderateness, include a large assortment of actions, some of which are not so bad as to warrant punishment, and some of which may not be bad at all in the circumstances. People also have a right to be bad, so long as they are not all that bad, which is one reason that unkindness, incivility, and inconsiderateness are not unlawful. This point certainly holds for manipulation. A world without manipulation would be no fun. And I found in my various travels in precursor work to what you're hearing today, that people who are very hard on manipulation tend to lack a sense of humor. Who wants never to be seduced? We might think that terms like fraud and assault have similar problems, and that thought is not entirely wrong. Still, long-term standing traditions, I'm bowing here to the great Scotsman Edmund Burke, are available to specify and concretize such terms as fraud and assault, greatly weakening concerns about vagueness and overbreadth. The same can't be said about manipulation. Still, for purposes of law and policy, the work done thus far in these remarks, I'm hoping, can be enlisted to do some things, focusing on the worst cases. I've urged that in the worst cases, manipulative behavior is a form of theft, and when that is so, it should be forbidden for that reason. Compare lying, which is not forbidden, with libel, which is. We do best, I'm urging, to focus on specific practices of manipulative behavior, those that are plainly very harmful and very hard to defend on any ground. Take, for example, a practice by a political campaign in March 2020, in which the text of the campaign contained a pre-filled checkmark. Make this a recurring donation. In June of the same year, the campaign used a similar strategy to default people into making an additional donation for, yes, the candidate's birthday. And in September, the campaign changed a monthly recurring donation with that original check mark into a new donation, which said a weekly recurring donation. As the campaign continued, the weekly recurring donation box was made less conspicuous and moved beneath other text. The strategies worked. They created a surge in donations, including a very large number of unintended payments, which in many cases exceeded people's credit card limits, requiring them to pay overdraft fees to their banks and leading them to cancel their credit cards to avoid recurring payments. This is an example. When do pre-checked boxes count as manipulative and a form of theft? To answer these questions, we need to answer two further ones. First, are pre-checked boxes transparent and visible? Second, are they in the interest of all or most who are affected by them? Since the answer to both questions is no, we have manipulation and we have a problem. There should be a prohibition on billing people in accordance with terms to which they did not actively consent, certainly in cases in which they would not do that if they were asked. This should be forbidden. Hidden fees and costs belong in a similar category. Regulators should be taking aim at them. They are a form of architecture which should be controlled. In the United States, my country, as you may have noticed from the barbaric accent to which you're listening, the Department of Transportation required air carriers and online travel agents to alter their web interfaces to incorporate all ticket taxes in their upfront advertised fees. Evidence suggests that this intervention, designed to overcome hidden prices, has been highly effective and saved consumers a lot of money. In thinking about whether to prescribe manipulation, we do best, I am suggesting, to target and to build on the most egregious cases and to draw up categories for legal control with close reference to them. Recall that lies as such do not violate the law. It's libel that's a violation of the law, and the same is true for perjury and false advertising. When lies are prohibited, it is because they do serious damage. In some cases, they too are a form of theft. They take something from someone for the benefit of another. In numerous cases, manipulative practices on the rise in the modern era have exactly the same character. They belong in the same category as coercion and lying. That is when, and that is why the law should target them. Thank you.